All right, hi, so welcome to episode number 1, the inaugural episode for Startup Business TV. I'm Richard Moore. I'm really pleased that you're watching this. Thank you very much for tuning in. And just to explain, the whole point of Startup Business TV is to draw together fantastic lessons and fundamentals that we can learn from companies that are typically really well known, many of which aren't startups anymore, but still they started somewhere, so there's really something to be learned. I'm really excited about what we're doing here. This is a really great project because I've worked with startup businesses for many years. I've been around for around 15 years building businesses and working in different spaces. But more recently, I've been really interested in sharing a lot of the great insight provided by people who actually know what they're doing. And so there are, courses out there I've put together, 8-Step Startup and so on. But this one is slightly different. The idea here is that I recognize from interacting with so many startup business owners that time is obviously of the essence. And when you're starting a business, you tend to find you've got precious little time to be poring over books, spending your time on Wikipedia, checking out every last little detail about companies to see if there are things you can learn. Sure, you may be reading a lot and reading around your subject, but the bottom line is you've got to get on with your work. And it may well be, in fact, that you've got a 9-to-5 job, which makes it even more prohibitive to spend time researching. But I still think it's essential because it's not just about what companies have done well, but it's also about mistakes that companies have made that you need to avoid as well. So with this in mind, the whole point of Startup Business TV is what we'll be doing is at least 1 episode a week. So at least get something every week, possibly more. I'm going to take 1 company each episode, and the aim of it is to come away with 3 lessons each time. So whatever company's covered, we're going to look at 3 lessons that you can take from how they were built, maybe at a startup phase or as they grew, that you can basically import into your business and execute right away. Because I feel that over time, we're going to end up with this huge bank of knowledge which allows you to say, right, in short snippets, these things won't be long, nice and informal, it's not going to be exhaustive, it's not huge advanced business classes. This is about simple fundamental lessons that really made the difference in a company. So I've put my time into researching them, and then I'm happy to share this information because it gives you a wealth of knowledge as well. So with that in mind, I'd like to start. I'm so excited about this. It's a really cool, fun thing to do, and a lot of people have been requesting something along these lines anyway, so I'm excited to be able to do it and provide that for you guys. Who knows where it will go, but yeah, I'm excited to be doing the first episode. So today we're going to start with a company I really like. I really like them, not just for what they do, but more because of how they were built and the journey that the co-founders actually went on. So we're starting the first lesson with Nike. Okay, so this is a company I would guess most of you are aware of. If you're not wearing something made by Nike, you probably own something made by them. And what you've got with Nike is a cultural brand that everyone's very familiar with, but they had tremendously humble beginnings. Okay, so they're co-founded, one could argue actually founded, but still he's a very humble guy, by a chap called Phil Knight, who at the time of recording, this is 2016, I think he's getting towards his 80s now, that's 78, I think he was born in 1938. And Nike actually wasn't the original company. It was actually born out of particular circumstances, which I'll get to in a sec. But basically, Phil Knight in 1962 decided he was going to be an accountant, and he kind of flitted around and went on a trip around the world and things like that. He decided to be a distributor for a company you may have heard of called Onitsuka, okay, who of course are a Japanese brand of running shoe, famous for the tigers. You're pretty familiar with those, but also many other shoes as well. So the thing about what he did, which we've got to be aware of right away, especially for those of you who are coming to decide on being a business owner, is that he went with something he was really passionate about and also knew plenty about as well. Phil Knight, first and foremost, was a runner. Okay, and in the 60s, this is a period you've got to try and imagine where there's no culture of running, okay? It's not like, you know, the guy lives in Oregon. When you see someone running on the street, he said people would throw things at them and think they're a bit weird. Okay, Phil Knight made a big impact on the world of running and actually created a situation where people moved in, or I suppose the word is they turned it into a movement and became a thing that people did. Like you see today, you go to any park, you see people running all the time. That just wasn't so much what was done back then. But the key thing is that he built a business based on something he was really into. And what came out of that was that he started working with more and more people who also shared a common keenness. So there's a lot of hype nowadays, especially if you're thinking about being an entrepreneur or building your own business, or more specifically, a lot of people are interested in, you know, finding some new income. Maybe you have a 9 to 5 and you want to have some extra income on the side, but certainly with the internet, these things are much more straightforward. You tend to find that people are jumping on bandwagons, and that a failure, okay, the majority of people who are failing with startup businesses are doing it often because they're not following a real passion. So this guy was a runner first and foremost, okay? So what it meant was he knew what he was talking about, and when he talked about it, he was evangelical about it, he was passionate about it, okay? If I was putting together this series and I had no interest in startup businesses and I'd never built any of my own, I'd had no successes with them, I'd never interacted with any other business owners, well then it would be a proper waste of time, because the level of detail I'd be able to give you would be quite shallow, and the level of passion and interest and belief I had would also be quite shallow. So it's a really important thing to bear in mind. And he co-founded, his first business was called Blue Ribbon, okay? And Blue Ribbon was named after the fact that, I can't even spell it. It was named after the fact that he had a lot of blue ribbons in his bedroom, and you know, from all the track and field stuff he'd done when he was younger. And he founded it with Coach Bauman, who was his actual running coach. So these two people were really keen on what they did. His coach famously used to pick apart running shoes and rebuild them in different ways, and that's where the term shoe dog comes from, which is of course where, Shoe Dog, which is where the name, this is the title of his autobiography that came out this year as well. So the important thing is that Blue Ribbon was the name of his first company, and he was the distributor in the US for Onitsuka. So he became, through a lot of back and forth, eventually became the sole distributor of Onitsuka trainers in the US. Now, ultimately, he came to a point when he realized that there was going to be a decision made to move him on and a new distributor come in, or at least they were looking at that. And what he did very wisely is another lesson we're going to get to in a second, but very wisely is he built in some real redundancy here. And what this means is, if you've got one business or rather if you have one income stream from a business, and you sit on that and presume it will always be there, then you're running the risk of it all going wrong. Because if you have one income stream, and that something happens to it, then you're really screwed if you really need your money, and then you're not getting any. So I tend to find, I mean, if I speak personally, I have many income streams coming from many different spaces. And it means if one went wrong, or even a few of them went wrong or imploded or had big problems or a bad month, then I have others to cover me at least, okay? And that's really an important lesson for those of you who want to get ahead. You may have a 9 to 5 and you tend to find that's typically not enough for many people in terms of an income, certainly if you want to invest or grow things. So then you get another income stream. It can add a little, but it's not safe. You need to go further than that. So he actually overlapped somewhat later on in the 70s when he then built Nike in the background, named after the Greek goddess of victory, okay? And in fact, it was almost a jibe at Onitsuka because they wanted to win over them. Now, his big competitor was Adidas, right? And early on, Phil Knight was always thinking Adidas, always. So he was looking right to the very top. So think about whatever world you're in now with your startup business. Imagine what's at the very, very top, the best business or person or organization in your industry. He had his eyes on them, okay? And that's the way to look at it. And if there are tactics along the way, but if your strategy is to ultimately be up there above them, well, then that's the difference. And that's the kind of the mindset you need to have. Ultimately, in 1980, when he took Nike public and became worth personal wealth was something in the region of $180 million. At that point, they'd overtaken Adidas for sales, and in fact, much later on, he became obviously a billionaire. And Nike was in fact way higher, even further in terms of revenue over Adidas. But one thing he also did, you may think, well, that's not really an additional revenue stream, that's just covering your arse and then just running on a new company again. But what he did later on in the 70s is he brought in apparel, okay, as a division as well. So firstly, he had running shoes, okay, running shoes, and then he decided to move to, he recognized that there might potentially be a market for people to wear trainers, as we call them in the UK, or sneakers, as you call them in the US, to wear casually. Because he said the dream is that I could have people just walking around the streets just wearing Nikes, okay? And when he opened up in China, he was looking around thinking, my goodness, everyone seems to almost be in uniform and all wearing black shoes. But then he started seeing a few people wearing trainers and he thought that there's hope there as well. And ultimately, he expanded his business by saying, right, we now need to cover a clothing line as well, for instance. And that's how I believe ultimately he beat Adidas, by saying if they provide everything for sports stars and athletes and people like that in terms of all their clothes, training gear and shoes, and we just provide the shoes, and that's obviously insufficient. So thinking always about other streams of income and how you can not jump to something completely new. He didn't go and set up a real estate company, for instance, or do something completely different. He added on some similar kind of areas of the business, and that helped him generate more income and boost and widen the net, I suppose. So in terms of lessons from Nike, there's some really important lessons, really important ones that I think came through when I did research on the company, and how he kind of brought the whole thing together. And the first thing was that he had massive passion for what he was doing, massive passion, okay? And what this meant was that he was able to, sorry, let me rewrite that, to get out there. Now, this sounds a bit of a weird thing, but getting out there is a massive, massive tip for anyone who has a product or a service that they really are passionate about, but maybe is faltering with the revenue and the sales. In his first year in business, Blue Ribbon generated $8,000. That's it. Now, I know that was like 1962, right? I get it, and there's inflation and things like that, but it wasn't earth-shattering, and in fact, because of the overheads of buying the shoes, shipping them in from Japan and then selling them on, and paying, of course, commission to anyone who helped him sell, he for often was making a loss on his end-of-year results. But the point is that if you're keen on your product, if you're able to evangelize about it, then you're able to always get out there. I've experienced this myself. And when things are getting hard, when you've got a month where things are difficult, the biggest asset you have is that you are the person who loves your product and your business the most and wants it to succeed the most. Much like a parent to a child, you're looking at your company thinking, right, it's in trouble, I've got to help it. Getting out there actually means moving out of your office in front of people. Maybe it's on the phone. In 2016, maybe it's connecting with people online, Twitter, Snapchat, maybe through Facebook chat or something like that, or maybe it's meeting people in the street. Phil Knight was finding it very difficult early on with Blue Ribbon to actually get his shoes into stores. So he just went, you know what, I'm not going to give up, because this is the problem a lot of people have. They decide to quit when they get a bit of adversity. He took as many shoes as he could. He shoved them into the back of his Valiant, which is his car at the time, and then he went to track days. Okay, so he went to days where people were doing running. He wore his shoes, he turned up and he spoke to as many of the athletes as possible. Okay, he spoke to as many of the coaches as possible. He got out there in front of people. Now, you will know deep down if you're a bit shy and unwilling to do this. But if your business means enough to you, you will do it. You cannot lose if you get out there and meet enough people. If you make sure you get out there and speak to people, you make 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 hours worth of phone calls in a day, bash through as many people as possible, you will always find that people will then end up buying your stuff, because simply you're getting yourself out there. It supersedes marketing, advertising, it supersedes distributors on your behalf, it supersedes even your own sales team. It doesn't, however, mean that it's more efficient. It's certainly not more efficient, because often you use a lot of time to do this, but it's more effective. Okay, is a difference. So it may be time consuming, it may take more time than it would be if you're successful generating business through an advert, but it is as close, in my mind, it's as close as you'll get to a fail-safe with a startup business if you get out there and actually meet people and talk about your product. And like I say, you will know if you're the kind of person that, hopefully this doesn't sound familiar, but if it does, you need to rectify it. If you're the kind of person that does everything for your startup business except get out there and actually sell the product itself and put it in front of people. And I remember working many years ago as a consultant with a company in the city in London with a guy who's probably worth about 25 million. He was the CEO of a business. He's been around for, I think, 40 years or so. And, you know, in his 60s, he was still transactional. He was still getting in front of people literally every day because he wanted to make sure that he obviously had that safety net. That's not necessarily something you have to do, okay? But it's something he kind of loved doing. But he always knew if our company got into difficulty, he could jump on and generate some money himself, okay? So it's a first really crucial lesson, but that is only born from passion. Because if you're having a hard time and the business isn't doing great and you're tired, okay, and you've got bills to pay, you need to be able to draw on something, and passion is really where it's going to come from. Number 2, okay, in terms of hiring, Phil Knight hired people that were interested in shoes, okay? They had a keen interest in his why, is the way it's put these days. And Simon Sinek, if you're unfamiliar with him, you should check out his TED Talk. Sinek is S-I-N-E-K, okay, on companies' why, okay? Because what the point is that if he has a mission to get his shoes in front of the right people and to be the best shoe company there is out there, and to not just generate or create shoes, but to create shoes that are epically quality, you know, really high quality shoes that people rave about because they have high technology in them and they have huge amounts of research in them, and they're the runner's shoe, if you like, the ones that athletes and Olympic stars use, then you need to hire people who are going to really get behind the message. So what it meant was that he didn't hire, okay, people who were perhaps the best salespeople in the world to do his sales. He didn't hire people that were the best R&D people in the world to do his R&D. He hired people who were passionate about the product, okay? So his coach, who co-founded it with him, he was one of the instrumental players here in making sure that the product was developed in the right way. One of the top people for distributing and selling his product early on is a guy he named Johnson, who was with him pretty much to the very end with Nike. Well, I say the end, but into the 90s. You know, he was just deeply passionate about it. So if you can find people who share your message, okay, so hiring people who are into your message, then I'll get rid of this. Then that will be a huge difference to those who want a job. And I would go as far as saying, because I've spent many years building teams in operations through to sales, well over probably close to a decade of experience doing that and interviewing people week in, week out, it's clear as day that you may have people who have credentials in terms of selling, for instance. We look at the sales side of things, but there's a difference, because if someone's keen and passionate about your message, it goes far more effectively than that. And to give you an example, someone who works for me now had 0 sales experience, but his keenness and passion for what I was doing with one of my businesses was pouring out of him. He could not get enough of the message and the journey that we're on, and as a result, he was such a good salesperson because he just passionately exuded this kind of this keenness for what we're trying to do, and that's infectious. Okay, so it was very interesting that he had this ragtag group of people, and investors later on were saying that, you know, Phil, you've got this company and everyone looks at you, this polished brand, and we come into your office and you're dressed like a bunch of hippies, basically. So he ended up having to go a bit more corporate with dress code and things like that so that investors would take him seriously. But hiring the right people comes down to those who share your beliefs and message. Because what it means, and here's the thing, what it means is that they will, as I say, run through walls for you. Because I've worked with people in the past who are amazing salespeople, or amazing operations directors, or amazing people in product development, for instance. But they may be fantastic, but they may also decide that at 5:30 at the end of the day they're done. And the weekends they never lift the phone. They never go the extra mile, but when they're there, they're really good at it. And that is only good to a certain degree. When you're starting your business, you have to recognize that sometimes you need to go over and above a 9-to-5 approach to things. And with that in mind, you need someone who doesn't look at the clock to know when it's their end of their day. They just keep going because they can't get enough of sharing the message about your product. And what it means is that you have people who are letting you know that they've just got a sale, and this has happened to me, and it's Boxing Day, you know, just after Christmas. New Year's Day, I had a guy saying, I'm just closing this guy off, what do you think about saying this to me? And I'm thinking, I think about my business all the time. I hired this person because they're passionate about what I do, and look, they're not interested in holidays, they're interested in results. And it means that when you need someone, when you need to call on them, they're going to be there. You know, 2 in the morning, they're there for you. The weekend, they're there for you. But more importantly, they're there because they're there for themselves, because actually this is a message that they believe in. And this is something that really stands out for Phil Knight's, what we'll call, inner circle of people he worked with. Third, which is kind of similar, you know, kind of along the same lines, and this is the best way to elicit great results from these kind of people that you hire, is his management style. Okay? Now, the key thing about management is that you should, in my opinion, Phil Knight was a great manager because he actually was better as a leader in a way. He had a top level vision of what his company wanted to be. He was actually very stubborn at times, whilst being also humble, but he was very laissez-faire, very kind of hands-off in his management style. And there's a saying which is, you should hire people and not tell them how to do their job, but tell them what to do and then let them impress you, okay? So what Phil Knight did really well was he just let people who were passionate about delivering this message to the point that it gave them their own impetus. He let them get on with it, okay? So this chap Johnson, who was essentially his first ever official employee, was in the west coast of America, and hilariously is a story that this chap Johnson every day almost would write a letter. This is 1960s, remember. He'd write a letter to Phil Knight telling him how he felt, every little thing he'd done, every anecdote and story about every person he'd interacted with that day. And it's amazing because Phil Knight never replied to half the messages. He pretty much never replied with any, if he did, he didn't give any praise, he said, either. He literally was just ignored him. And so Johnson would eventually get to a point where he was saying, look, Can you send some words of encouragement, please? He never gave up. He still sent these messages all the time. And he was always happy to keep working because he believed in the message. But what was the key thing about this is by leaving him alone, he knew what he needed to do and he found his own way. So if you can hire people who are keen on your message, and I would add who are intelligent as well, because an intelligent, or rather, intelligence is one thing, but people who have common sense, or ability to think laterally and show initiative, those people will say, here's where I am right now, here's where I need to be, I've got the passion and belief to get myself there, what do I need to do to get there? And yeah, you may guide them, but it might be that the first year they take this roundabout route to get from point A to point B, and then after a while they refine it, but they find their own way. Because if their livelihood depends on it, and if delivering the message that they're passionate about belongs on it, is reliant upon it, well then leave them to get on with it and do it their way, means that actually you're leveraging their creative ability and they're passionate for your message and your product, their passion for your message and your product, rather than always being limited to the confines of what you can suggest. Because the difference between leadership and management really comes down to this. If you're telling people what to do all the time and prescribing the way in which they must work, you'll end up, okay, with people who are only doing things as far as you can think of how they can be done, whereas bringing in their brain cells and allowing them to be involved means a hands-off management style can be very effective. You know, it means, I suppose, for the most part that Blue Ribbon certainly, and then ultimately Nike, was not disparate, but certainly was very much a business that was less fly by the seat of the pants, but more kind of a creative, organic way of growing, in the sense that whilst certain, you know, boxes had to be ticked in terms of legal and accounting and things like that, in the main they were saying, right, what needs to be done, how can we get there, how can we be inventive and creative in a way of doing it. And it's increasingly prevalent these days. If you look at newer companies, certainly in the tech space is a good example of it, there are more creative ways of working because they recognize that if you can leverage someone's passion and get a result, then does it really matter about the method that with which you use to get there. So with that in mind, a hands-off approach. Okay, I'm sure if you ever asked Phil Knight, he would completely agree that a hands-off approach is exactly what he had. And I'd say almost to the point where praise from him would be something like, okay, that's fine, but he would go ballistic if things went really badly. And in fact, it meant that he had high standards, but he recognized that by giving people their space, actually you can get a lot from them. But this all hinges, this lesson, on making sure that they're hired because they believe in your message. So what you want to be doing, this is a bit of a recruitment tip, what you want to be doing is spending time around people who really love what you do. Spend time around people that you want to give a punt on, because they're not just they've not got a great CV necessarily, they're not presented in the right way necessarily, but they just really buy into what it is you do. You just click and connect, and your message, which you'll always be passionate or evangelical about, as I say, is something that they're going to be feeling, oh wow, this is exactly something I can get behind. And they're the people who are gold, okay? And they're the people that when you let them just get on with it, they will flourish, okay? So these things are really important, and these are all soft skills in a way, as opposed to particular business things, so to speak, that Phil Knight did. But always bear in mind that even if these things, this is as he grew, but even if these 2 points aren't coming in, if you're way back, a light year away from being in this position of hiring people, you always have the ability to get out there and push on your product and show people and share it. Because ultimately, if your message comes through with the passion that you should have for what it is you do, if you've selected the right kind of product or service to sell, you will always get people who just believe in you because of your massive amount of belief as well. So we'll finish there. I just wanted to give you a sense of it. So episode 1, we've covered just essentials on how Nike was formed. There's so much more. I suggest you read Shoe Dog, the biography as well. It gives you a lot more around the subject too, and it obviously comes from Phil Knight directly. But these 3 lessons are really crucial, and I think they really can be applied to a startup business. And as I say, every week we will do another episode, at least one a week, on another company. So you should hopefully over time get plenty of new information. And I may be that I'm in one of my home offices today, at one of my houses, but I will probably move out to an office, in one of my offices in the town, up the road a bit later on, give me a bit more space. Yeah, it's been really good fun. I really enjoyed it, and I'll see you on the next show. Thank you very much for watching.